Ms. Howard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, members, for allowing me to be up here today. I have a couple of questions about the medications, but I do want to just kind of take, again, what's been asked in previous questions about who this would implicate. And it sounds to me like from the questions that you've just received that even if a parent whose child had been raped, 12-year-old, and they made the decision as a parent that they wanted that child to not have to have a child, and they ordered this medication, that parent, the mom, the dad, the grandparent, whatever, the parent, the mom would be impacted by this legislation and would be charged in this legislation, whatever the correct words. I'm not a lawyer, but would suffer the consequences of this legislation.
So in that horrific situation, Representative Howard, my heart obviously breaks for that family and that woman as they deal with a horrific crime committed against her and her body and her family. And just speaking from my own heart and my own worldview on this and my own beliefs is that the last thing that girl in that situation, that 12-year-old girl, needs is a drug that's mailed in from another state for which, whether it's provided by her parents or whether it's a 17-year-old or a 25-year-old that is being trafficked, and these drugs are given to her by her human trafficker or by her abuser, in all those horrific situations. My heart and my mind tells me that the last thing that girl needs in that situation is a drug mailed in from out of state that can do her body substantial, irreversible, and potentially deadly harm.
Well, I know that we're going to have some witnesses talking about the medical implications. Quite frankly, a pregnancy for a 12-year-old would cause substantial, potentially irreparable harm. And that is something that a parent might want to prevent happening. We do a lot of talking in this legislative body about parents having the right to make decisions about their own children's health care. Certainly in this case, I think that would be something that a parent would want to consider. And the fact is, I want to talk a little bit about the medications. You refer to it as being unsafe, and I think there's a lot of medical science and medical journals that would refute that. This is an extremely safe medication. But one last piece on this before I move to the medications. And this is not medication abortion, but this is abortion. In the 1960s, and the reason we're doing this is because, and the reason that people are having to look for this outside of our state is because we've made it impossible to get an abortion in this state. In the 1960s, when it was also illegal, before people of my generation saw the benefits of the 1973 laws that allowed women to have choice, my mother had an abortion. She was aided and abetted by our minister. So it looks to me like we're also talking about if a minister helps, which some clergy will do. If a minister, a clergy person, helps their parishioner to obtain these medications, then that person of the cloth, that clergy person would also be subject to the consequences of this legislation. Is that not correct?
Representative Howard, what you just described, I'm going to be honest, is absolutely horrific to hear. And I've been doing this long enough to know, especially in conversations like this, I know it's delicate, I'm trying to be careful, but I'm also not going to apologize for my core convictions and what I believe. So I'm just going to be myself here, and with all due respect.
Of course.
What you just described to me is a wolf in sheep's clothing. And I wrestled with this question overnight as I couldn't sleep, and I was thinking about this bill, and I thought about what am I going to say, what's the right answer when someone asks me about the 12-year-old girl, like my own daughter who's 13, if something horrific happened to her, what would I do? And I sought spiritual wisdom. I got online, and just yesterday, we honored Pope Francis. I think it was Chairman Anchia who stood at the mic and delivered beautiful words about Pope Francis. And Pope Francis was very clear on this, that a child is always, and he repeated the word always twice, a child is always, always a gift. That's what I believe.
And what we're talking about here, and again, I know your heart, I know my heart, and I know we're both well-intentioned in what we do here, and we have different beliefs about this. What we're talking about here is medication abortion of a fetus. And we can differ on how we want to describe that, but that is the medical situation that we're talking about here. Let me ask you about the medications. One of the concerns I think that some of us have is that this could impact the national manufacturing of these medications. If there's going to be some adverse potential liabilities for companies, we may see a reduction in the production of these medications. And as I'm sure you're probably aware, at least one of these, misoprostol, is used in a variety of gynecological complications that have nothing to do with terminating the pregnancy, other than they are used with miscarriage, right? And a miscarriage is a terminated pregnancy.
Of which my wife and I have suffered with.
And I am sorry for your loss there. That is also a very difficult thing to go through, and it impacts so many families. But if indeed we find ourselves in that position where if the manufacturers are producing less of this necessary medication, what's going to happen here if we end up having increases in sepsis and maternal deaths and infant mortality and all the things that are associated with the inability to treat medical complications, which we're also trying to address this session, obviously. But if we don't have the medications to do that, if they're in short supply and they're not available to us, I mean, how do you anticipate responding to something like that?
I very, very simply put, that is not the intent of the bill, and I think you're suggesting, and you may not be wrong, that that's an unintended consequence of the legislation, is that it might affect the production of drugs that are used for other medical purposes, and that is not at all my heart or the intent of the bill. And so the intent of the bill is it is a crime in Texas, which is not just an act. The actus rei, you have to have the mens rea, knowingly using these drugs to terminate a pregnancy. That is what this bill is aimed at doing. But there are exceptions and protections that are written into the bill to allow for these drugs to still be used for other purposes, some of which you just named. And so whatever we would need to do to work together to make sure that manufacturers that are doing it without the intent to effectuate an abortion, then I'm all for considering what that might be, because you know, I don't need to say this, but I'm saying anyways, that is not at all my heart or intent of this bill.
Well, in fact, the manufacturers are producing these for abortion because abortion is illegal in many other states.
It's not.
That's correct. But the fact you just said, if they were producing these medications for things other than abortion.
Well, I don't serve in any other state legislature.
Okay.
I serve in Texas, and in Texas in Texas we've said abortions are illegal here.
I know.
Except in a few and yet they've found this loophole, and our reports indicate that over 2,800, nearly 3,000 abortion drugs every single month, over 30,000 annually, are being shipped into Texas from out-of-state providers. So they've found a loophole in the laws we passed, and the law we disagree on, but as someone who supported those laws and want to see those laws strengthened and followed, that this bill is meant to what I consider a loophole in the law that allows pills to still be shipped into the state at a growingly and rapidly increasing pace.
Pills to be shipped into the state that are produced legally and coming from a state.
And used illegally. There's a lot of things that are produced legally that are used illegally, and that's what's happening with these drugs in Texas. They may be legal in some other state, and their use for a specific purpose may be legal, but their use to effectuate an elective abortion and to terminate the life of a baby in Texas is illegal in the state I represent.
And to follow up on the question, I think it was Representative Anchia, so if the medication is mailed here, but the person travels outside of the state to take the medication,
I mean, the fact that it was mailed into Texas to a Texas citizen.
so if they went out of state and took it, they'd still be with somebody helping them do that. The person that helped them do that, their mother.
The act here would be the shipping and the mailing in, the production, the manufacturing, the distribution, the provision, as Representative Enchi and I talked about, to a Texas citizen in Texas across our state lines. That's the actionable conduct here. And I will say, members, I hope you'll take note of some of the language, substantial language that we removed from the original file bill relating to travel.
Yes, and I thank you for that.
And so we did understand and do understand, and I'm just sensitive to those concerns, and we removed that language.
Thank you.
So, but it's still, that wouldn't affect the situation you're talking about.
And just to close on that particular part of the questioning, again, what we do in Texas does have impact on what happens in the rest of the country, and it could impact the manufacturing of a drug that is needed for a wide variety of uses. And regardless of why it's produced, regardless of how other states might produce it, regardless of the fact that there might be more of a need to produce it, to ensure that those who want to seek abortion health care have access to these drugs, that we have to think about unintended consequences, that we should be thinking about that no matter what policy we're making, and that could be a potential consequences. We would see less production because of the threats to the companies if they do something that they could have some liability for.
If and when this bill hopefully passes and is signed into law, my hope would be that the effect would be that manufacturers and distributors would be very careful to advertise in the state of Texas, to market in the state of Texas, which is you go online now. It's very easy to get onto these websites and to order them, and that the action in effectuating abortions in the state of Texas would slow and hopefully someday stop. But the usage of the drugs for other medical purposes, medical emergencies, whatnot, as you've described, would hopefully continue. But again, Representative Howard, these drugs are, and there are experts that can speak more to this than I can.
Okay.
So inartfully, I just, when a woman goes online and there's these providers and these options, and they can put their address in, very minimal health information, and then within a couple days receive two pills together, one of which is intended to starve the baby and the other one which is intended to deliver the baby. It's clear that those bills taken together for that purpose, ordered for that purpose, delivered for that purpose, are designed to and delivered to effectuate an illegal abortion in Texas.
And of course, the words that we associate with things and the rhetoric that we use, the fact is that there's not a starvation going on. There is a lack of the hormone that will sustain the pregnancy, and then there's a sloughing off, just like in a menstrual period. But we can have the doctors talk about that.
Ms. Howard, we've gone on a long time, and I
Okay,
know
I'm
you're going to
sorry.
have other questions.
I'm sorry.
I
Thank you,
appreciate you
Chairman.
being here, and I will accommodate when I can, but we have a lot to get to.
I will wait. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Representative Howard.
Mr.